We promised discussions of the 1998 film Beloved for a while, and today is the day we will attempt to start the conversation by talking about the story from Toni Morrison's novel of the same name that this film attempted to tell, and why its adaptation onto the big screen was not successful.
Many of you have said that you don't understand the film and have asked us to explain the film to you. So, in this first video on Beloved, we'll tell you the story of Setha, Beloved, Paul D, and Denver, the way Toni Morrison presented it to audiences in arguably one of the best pieces of African American literature ever written. And then we'll talk about the film and why many of you had trouble understanding it.
I'm Heit.
And I'm Cheri.
And you've discovered Axiom Amnesia.
We want to thank all of the supporters who helped to make this video possible. If you want your name to appear alongside these contributors, make a one-time donation via Cash App, or you can head on over to patreon.com/axiomamnesia to enjoy all of the benefits of becoming a monthly subscriber. So first, every word in Toni Morrison's novel is critical, and it is difficult to cut any part of this amazing piece of literature out and then still have the story remain intact. And at its most basic level, Beloved is the story of a woman who is haunted by the ghost of the child whose life she took so that that child and her other children would not be returned to enslavement.
So Toni Morrison tells us that she conceived the idea of Beloved after considering a real-life situation where a woman did exactly that.
This is a quote from the Digital Public Library of America. Beloved is a novel inspired by the true story of Margaret Garner, who escaped with her family from slavery in Kentucky to freedom in Ohio in 1856. When U.S. Marshals apprehended the family under the Fugitive Slave Act, Margaret Garner murdered one of her children, a daughter, rather than seeing her enslaved again.
The novel won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction a year after its publication and was a finalist for the 1987 National Book Award. A survey of writers and literary critics compiled by the New York Times ranked it as the best work of American fiction from 1981 to 2006. So it is with all of this in mind that we approach the novel first and then the story the film attempts to depict.
What is the movie Beloved about? What is the actual story that the film is trying to tell? Let's start with a discussion of the basic story in the novel. So the story in the novel unfolds as memories and flashbacks in time, while at the same time moving forward from a starting point with Setha and her daughter Denver living in Ohio in 1873 after freedom has come for Black folks in America in the period after the American Civil War. We will tell the story in chronological order to prevent as much confusion as possible, because the way it's presented in both the book and the film are as these flashbacks, and that can be one of the reasons it was confusing.
The basic story is that Setha was an enslaved woman living on a plantation called Sweet Home in Kentucky during slavery. There, she meets her husband, Hallie, and is also surrounded by other Black men also in bondage. Hallie's mother is Baby Suggs, who is no longer on Sweet Home because she is free and lives in Ohio.
Hallie and Setha eventually have 3 children while she is still on Sweet Home, 2 boys and a young daughter. Sweet Home is considered by its owners and by the people he keeps on his farm, the enslaved, to be good and a decent place for the enslaved. After all, the owner, Mr. Garner, even lets Hallie hire himself out on Sundays in order to purchase his mother, Baby Suggs, who is granted her freedom because of the money that her son is allowed to earn off of the plantation or the farm. It should be noted that Baby Suggs had 8 children, of whom Hallie was the only one she knew the whereabouts of at that time. Death and circumstances had stolen the other children from her.
After Baby Suggs became free, Mr. Garner was the one who actually took Baby Suggs to Ohio to meet the Bodwins, 2 white abolitionist siblings who allowed Baby Suggs to live at 124 Bluestone Road in exchange for domestic work.
Still, obviously, the conditions on Sweet Home are oppressive for Setha, Hallie, and their children, and Paul D. and his brothers, because people are being kept there against their wills. I mean, it's a plantation.
But when the original owner of the land, Mr. Garner, dies, his wife hires a man called School Teacher to manage the farm, and that's when things take a turn for the worse.
School Teacher is a sadistic man who, along with his nephews, views Blacks just as he does the livestock livestock on the farm, and he measures their body parts and studies them like biological specimens. He stops Hallie from working outside of the farm, which prevents him from earning money to purchase the freedom for the rest of his family. So it is this that prompts Hallie to plan the escape of he and his family, Setha and their 3 children, from Sweet Home.
So the escape doesn't go as planned, and Setha recounts that Hallie went insane. Paul A was hanged, Sixo was burned, and Paul D ended up with a bit in his mouth. In the wake of all of this, Setha is violated by multiple men simultaneously, and they even take her milk in the process.
Setha still runs away from Sweet Home despite being very pregnant with Denver at the time. She actually gives birth to Denver, her daughter, on the way to freedom. And Denver is named after the woman Amy Denver, who helped Setha during the childbirth on her way to Ohio.
So Setha eventually makes it to Baby Suggs in Ohio, and she is free along with all 4 of her children. They settle into a life of freedom there. Baby Suggs is also a preacher of sorts, and she preaches in the wilderness. The peace doesn't last for long, though.
About a month after Setha made it to freedom in Baby Suggs in Ohio, school teachers showed up at the house looking for her to take her and her children back to Sweet Home in Kentucky on the plantation. He was accompanied by a slave catcher and the sheriff, and this was totally legal at the time. Keep in mind that the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, quote, required that slaves be returned to their owners even if they were in a free state. This act also made the federal government responsible for finding, returning, and trying escaped slaves.
Setha decides that she and her children are not going back to Sweet Home, and she takes all 4 of her children, the 2 boys, Beloved and Denver, to a shed where she fully intends to send them to the next life, rather than see them return to Sweet Home. In the end, she is only able to slice Beloved across the neck as others intervene to stop her from doing it.
This incident does prevent Setha and her children from being returned to Sweet Home, but the community is outraged and Setha and her family are ostracized and whispered about because of it. In the meantime, Paul D was sent to prison in Alfred, Georgia, because he tried to kill Brandywine, the man to whom school teacher had sold him.
Eventually, Baby Suggs dies. Setha never finds out what happened to Hallie.
So this is the point in the timeline where we are when the story actually starts in both the book and in the movie. Setha's youngest daughter, Denver, is now a teenager, and the house has a ghost disturbing it. Setha's 2 sons have had enough, and they abandon Setha and Denver there at this house with the ghost. Shortly after, Paul D shows up. Setha hasn't seen Paul D since they were back at Sweet Home trying to escape.
Paul D comes, and it seems like he might stay a while with Setha and Denver, but he is kind of spooked by the ghost in the house. It's a bizarre situation that he's entered. So there's a confrontation with this entity in the house, and it looks like everything is resolved. Like Paul D can be a family with Denver and Setha now in peace. So they go out to a fair, and everyone is smiling and happy.
In the meantime, a fully grown woman in a black dress emerges from the water and shows up on Setha's doorstep. And when the 3 of them come back from the fair, they see her. The woman seems strange and sleepy and unable to talk. And so they bring her in and they try to question her to find out where she came from.
Eventually, Setha and Denver realize that this woman is Beloved. She has the mind of a baby of the age she was when she was taken out by Setha, but her body is the age she would have been if she had lived. She's just a year or 2 older than Denver.
So Denver is around there teaching her how to walk and talk, and Setha seems kind of oddly happy to have her baby ghost in the flesh. And Paul D just knows that the situation is crazy.
This is where the story gets even wilder, and we'll summarize for time's sake, but Beloved ends up seducing Paul D and eventually ends up pregnant by him. Paul D eventually leaves after the incidents with Beloved and after finding out that Setha had tried to off all of her children, but was successful with taking out Beloved.
After that, Beloved with her big pregnant belly and Setha are there and just acting crazy, while Denver is just sad and a victim of this whole situation with her mother obsessed with the jealous ghost of her dead baby. Denver tries to carry on and ends up getting this job to take care of her mother in the house and whatnot. She eventually tells one of the townswomen who always gossiped about the family, that things had really gotten out of control.
So then all of these black church women from the community descended upon Seth's house, singing and praying to get this thing, this ghost or whatever it is, sent back to the spirit world. Seth and a naked beloved with a full pregnant belly emerge from the house, and the women start praying even harder. It works, and the ghost of beloved just disappears in the flesh.
Denver is eventually able to move on with her life and be free of the burdens of the past. Paul D shows back up eventually and sees that things are okay now. Well, as okay as they can be given all that has happened. And that's basically the very streamlined summary of the book. So this is the story that the film is attempting to tell.
So if the novel was so revered and everybody loved it and stuff, why didn't it translate well to film?
Well, first and foremost, the most obvious thing is that there is no way that a single film, even with a running time of 2 hours and 52 minutes like Beloved is, it's almost 3 hours, there's no way that there was enough time to tell this story very well. And I want to be clear before we get into all of the criticism of the film itself. I think that the idea of trying to bring this to film was a great one. I don't have any issue with the fact that Oprah wanted to bring it to film, because this is a story I think that is amazing and should have been told, but might have been told better in a different format, like perhaps a miniseries or something like that.
I do think that the film was good, though. So that's what I don't, its success to me isn't pinned on whether or not, critics or even viewers really liked it, right?
Right.
So for myself, I think that it's really good. And I think it was very ambitious of Oprah, to even try to bring this story.
That's true.
To folks. But I guess if it was a series or whatever, it probably could have fleshed out more stuff that, like, all the time with film, you're leaving stuff out if you're coming from a novel.
Right. And then here's the other thing, right? So I definitely applaud Oprah for wanting to bring it, but, they probably should have done a limited series. But also there's no denying that the acting in the film was top notch. And I agree with you. This was I would say was almost a good film, because I was familiar with the story already. Like, I kind of got it already. But, I would just say almost. It definitely wasn't a bad film, but it was confusing to a lot of people. I know a lot of you, when we've brought up the idea of Beloved in the past, have mentioned, like, can y'all just break this down? Can y'all explain it? I don't know what the heck was going on. And I think part of the reason is because not a word was wasted in the novel. And the novel, if you're listening to it, takes about 7-8 hours to listen to. Well, how can you condense that down to even 3 hours? It's just impossible.
So it's kind of like our viewers who come and they comment and say, how is our video longer than the movie, right?
Yes.
Like, why would the movie be longer than the novel and such and such? You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying that's a valid perspective, but I'm just saying that there are ways to tell stories that aren't as long as another way a story was told.
Yes. So Oprah Winfrey, Danny Glover, Kimberly Elise, Sandy Newton, they were amazing in this film, and the acting was amazing. So this was just not the problem. It's just, I still go with, it was their attempt to cram so much into the film that so much was left out, and it just felt very fragmented. So Oprah had mentioned, though, in an interview, just how devastating it was that this film that she wanted to succeed so badly did not do well. And in fact, I think it might have been like, I want to say it wasn't actually an interview. It was like with Iyanla, back in the day, how Iyanla used to be on Oprah, and then she wasn't anymore, and then she came back for a while. I feel like it was the second go round of Iyanla on the Oprah show, where Oprah admitted to Iyanla that, like, that was a failure, and that was like connected with like how she felt about herself in the moment, because the success of this movie wasn't something that she could control. It was just outside of her control. Anyway, so I bring that up to say that, like, Oprah, it's not like we're dissing the movie and Oprah doesn't realize that it didn't go like she wanted,
Yeah, but so I think with most artsy stuff, it's just not going to work, right? It happens all the time. People who do YouTube videos, they know your best work is you like, why didn't this get any views?
Isn't that crazy, though? Because I feel like some of the videos that, I've put the most thought and work into, and, just everything, thinking all about what I want to say. Those may not be the most popular videos at all, pound for pound. And it's the ones where I was just kind of speaking off the cuff and maybe I fumbled through a little bit. And, you know, that people that turn out to be more popular a lot of times. And
it might be the thing of you need to write to, I don't know what they're at now, but a 6th grade level, right? So you need to tell a story that's going to reach a broader audience, right? Or be more accepting to a broader audience. Because let's say I'm at 11th grade level, right? And I'm always there and it's, woo, I like stuff over here. But all the time, I don't want that, right? So I might go into something and be like, yeah, I don't, it's just too much, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like a lot of people don't seem to know what was going on in the film and they need it explained, right? Which,
okay, but let me just say, Toni Morrison, the woman who wrote the book, said, according to Siskel and Ebert, in their review of the film, she said that it took her 3 times to appreciate this film. She wrote the book.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's a different work.
That's
right.
True.
That's the thing. If you tell somebody a story and then they go and they tell it another way, you may be like, you probably attached to what you done. So you like, wait. And when you write and when you read, you envision something else, right? So your imagination is working one way and then you see it on film like, wait, hold on. This is not how it looked when I wrote it or when I read it. Or
when I envisioned in my mind, yeah.
So it could be that. But if you did appreciate it after 3 times, then that must mean it's good.
Yes. Well, I'm not one to like go to what really Rotten Tomatoes or back in the day, you know, those of us who are of a certain age, we remember Siskel and Ebert coming on and then they would review 4 or 5 however many movies in their 30-minute show and tell you if this movie was good or whatever.
And if you were black, they would piss you off.
But I mean, I actually think that they did like, at least some of the black movies, like they were very accepting. You know, but what I would say about this movie, Roger Ebert, I think hit the nail on the head. He said, if you haven't read the book, you'll have trouble at first understanding the story. And so I also wonder, like, could it be that the filmmakers, Jonathan Demme, who was the director, and Oprah, and other people were just too close to the film and just too familiar with the book that they couldn't see that it would be confusing to people who hadn't read the book?
I don't know. I think it's viewers as well. If you go into it and you don't think of, oh, I'm going to have to try to understand what's going on. Because I think it kind of does. When it shows your flashbacks and stuff, you're like, oh, there's this haunting. What is going on? And then you see a person come up out of the river, right? And then you see the flashbacks of what happened. Then it should be like, ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And then all this other stuff is a result of this, right? So, but you know, when these happen, I try to make some connection to what I know, right? So, like, this was in Ohio around 1873 and stuff, right? And our histories are all different because we all come from different regions and stuff. So, what we know of those times are all different, right? So, this is talking about what's going on in, you know, basically the free states of Ohio. So, I'm from Louisiana. One of the things they teach, you know, well, they taught, I don't know, maybe it depends on your school too, is that there was a black governor in Louisiana. The first black governor was a guy named PBS Pinchback. And he served from 72 to 73.
Like, I don't know why.
It sounds like it's from those times.
A pimp named Slickback.
Oh, bro. PBS Pinchback. Yeah, but
okay, for real.
But it kind of connects to today, right? So from 72 to 73, but they don't teach you how he got into office and stuff, right? They just like, whoa, we had a black one doing Reconstruction. So what happened was there was this election and it was contested by the governor, right? The governor did not, the Democrat won. I think the governor, if you look at the results and who became governor, it don't match up. Basically, in this 1872 election of, you know, gubernatorial election of Louisiana. And the governor got impeached for stealing the election.
Bruh.
And that is how PBS Pinchback became an acting governor.
Okay, those of y'all from
for
Louisiana,
about a month or so.
Go to the comments and let us know. Did you know that was the first black governor of Louisiana?
Yeah, so
did you know that was the story?
That's what was happening around the time that this movie, the beginning of the movie and the novel
Right.
That's what's going on where I'm from.
And let me just
Deep South.
revisit that, because we kind of went over the summary, because so many things, like the summary was extremely streamlined. Like, we didn't tell you every detail of all that was going on with all the characters. We just kind of told you about like the main story, which is kind of like Seth's story, right? But Paul D had his story, Baby Suggs had her story, Denver had her story, you know, in the movie. And even Beloved, I guess, had her story as well. But you know, back to this idea of the audiences and whether or not the audience could really understand what was going on. The other thing that I wondered was, like, did they purposely cut out some of the most horrific things from this film because they feared that the audience couldn't take it? And also a complaint that we hear from you all a lot with this notion that I don't want to hear about another slavery movie, nothing about slavery, it's nothing, you know. And what I would say is, on this particular channel, we hear that less, but on the main Axiom Amnesia channel, oh boy, you know, anything, it's always like, oh, you're trying to, you know, taint my mind by, you know, keep making me feel bad about watching this. And actually, Toni Morrison herself said, and I don't know if I agree with this, but she did say about this book that it wasn't a book about slavery, which technically, you know, while it did, they were in slavery at parts of the book, right? But it was more about the people and like how they survived it and their stories.
I think it's a story of Reconstruction, because I think it ends around Jim Crow time.
Yeah.
Right. Which could be considered, you know, the 1890s. Right. So Reconstruction probably ended way before that. But I would just
like
generally
1873,
say,
I guess, is where we see like when Beloved emerges, I think is what they said. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just say we're just in Reconstruction time. But it's all because of what went on during American slavery, right? So this post-Civil War stuff is just the only reason that the ghost is here then is because of slavery and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And the laws of the United States.
Well, so here's the thing, that it was only because of the laws. Two other things I want to bring up, and I guess I should talk about them separately. The first one is just understanding history in general. We kind of hit this home a lot. What I love is that a lot of you guys in the comments really have a good grasp of history, and, you know, will bring stuff up about, you know, things that happen not just only in our lifetimes, but, you know, prior to that. Like, you really understand, especially American history. And that's going to be really important, because I think when you understand it, like, it doesn't seem so crazy to want to continue to see the patterns that happened in the past, and then be looking at the present to say, hey, do I see a pattern recognition? Is anything that we saw in the past happening now today, and what we can expect for the future? That's number one. But then the second thing is that in this film, it kind of it forces you to think about the enslavement of Africans who, yes, were stolen from the continent differently. Because, you know, it's like, if you read in a book, it's just, oh, they were kept beyond their will, but not like you're not visualizing the most heinous things. And so let me give you some examples from some stuff that does happen in the book. The first thing is, let's talk about names. The first name is Beloved, and Beloved was not the actual name of this young child. Beloved came from the fact that her mother wanted to put her name on her headstone after, you know, she had successfully, I guess, sent her to the upper room. And I don't mean that in a funny way. I'm just saying so that we're not saying so many triggering type of words. But she wanted it to say Dearly Beloved, but she could not afford the cost to etch in per letter the full Dearly Beloved, and all she could afford was the word beloved. So we don't even know Beloved's real name, because surely she would have had a name by the time she was, you know, crawling and walking age, right? Well, she wasn't quite walking, but like crawling, arm baby age, right? That's number one. Paul D. Okay, they just call him Paul D. And if you hear Paul D, you don't think anything of it, right? You're just like, Paul D. Lots of people are named D, nicknames D. We don't know why he's Paul D. But if you read the book, you know why. And so here's an excerpt from the book. And it says, you know, talking about the people who were left on Sweet Home Plantation. And it says, and so they were Paul D. Garner, Paul F. Garner, Paul A. Garner, Hallie Suggs, and Sixo, the Wild Man. So basically, Paul D. had brothers, And instead of each of them even getting their own unique name, they were like Paul A, Paul B, Paul C, you know what I mean? But this man who was their quote owner was supposedly so good and he treated them so well and all of this and that, and was so proud of them because he said he had men who were, the men on his plantation. They were better. They weren't just, field hands or whatever, and they were well-mannered, blah, 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 right? But they didn't even have their own name. And that's why his name was Paul D.
Yeah. So why was this house haunted?
So the house was haunted because this is the same house that was Baby Sug's house that she came to that belonged to the abolitionists, right? It was 124, I forget the name of the street. Bluestone, yeah. So this is that house. So Baby Suggs was there, and then, then after the abolitionists passed on, Baby Suggs was at the house with everybody at this house. And so this is the same house that Setha stayed in even after Baby Suggs dies, because by the time the movie starts, Baby Suggs is already dead. So we only see her in flashbacks. But this is the house that Beloved was in when she went to Ohio. And so when she comes back as the ghost, she's haunting that house. And that's why Beloved is there, right? When when she's a ghost, a spirit ghost, right? And not just this, physical manifestation.
Well, so what happened was, so there was this ghost, and then we do our thing, right? That you see in every movie, right? Hey, we need to cast this ghost out. So we talked about the Deliverance film by Lee Daniels that starred Andra Day, right? And we always get this, you got to cast the ghost out, right? So this, I guess, is kind of different because the ghost was cast out in that spirit form. And then arisen in the flesh.
Yeah. So,
so they got what they want.
Well, they cast the ghost out at first, and then she said, I'll do you one better, hold my beer. And she showed up in the flesh.
Right. And why was the mother accepting, right? Because these may be questions that people have.
Yeah, I think a lot of these questions are like, we have to do a full breakdown.
Okay.
Because like, I'm going to like scratch the surface of some of this, but some of it, like, you really have to understand everything that happened in the scene. We got to kind of go back and forth between the film and the book to really fully understand it. But so let me just preface my simplified answer to that. What was the question? Why did the ghost show up?
No, why was the mother accepting?
The mother was accepting because even if it was a ghost, this was her baby. And the silence is important right there.
I guess.
This was her child that she took out of the world to save, right? She took this child out of the world to try to save the child from a life of torment, a life of what she had endured and experienced on Sweet Home. Because there, in the summary, we use the phrase took her milk. That's what she says in the book. They took my milk. But the reality of what happened to her, to Setha, when she was on Sweet Home before she runs away and comes to Ohio, is that she was gang violated by these men who then, now she has a young baby. So she's breastfeeding the baby. Not at the time it happened, but, like she has milk for the baby. And then they took the milk, if you will,
Yeah.
And so, like, there's so many things symbolically with the fact that this is a mother, that she is trying to sustain her baby through her body, and they even took that from her, and let alone the part of the violation of just her own body to begin with. So, that's the backdrop of all of this. Like, this story, let me just tell y'all, and y'all know because I said it in the comments, I said it in videos in the past, that it was months ago when we prepared to cover this film. And I went and I prepared, I call it read the book again, but I listened to the audiobook on Audible and listened to a lot of interviews with Toni Morrison, took in everything that I could take in about the book. And like, I was just so emotionally spent, honestly. after that process that I was just like, I don't even know if I have the strength to cover it. Like to talk about it on this level is one thing, because we're not really saying what it is. And in the next video that we have, we will be delving a little bit more deeply into the idea that what does it mean to say I'm a mother or I'm a parent and I love my child so much I'm going to take this child out of here instead of let them live what is going to happen.
Yeah. So was it intentionally a horror? So what I would say is, okay, the movie, right? That we have the stuff that spook us, and kind of, we talked about Get Out on the other channel, and some people are like, it's not a horror. These certain types of movies are horrors, right? Which are just basically the supernatural type of stuff. It's only if you like supernatural types of things, right? Or some super slasher stuff makes it a horror. Right, so the things that were in there are horrific, right? But is it a horror, and is it intentionally done for the sake of being, like, if I'm telling a story, do I just put these things in here because I'm making it a horror film? You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's weird because I've seen it said like psychological thriller horror film.
Yeah.
So like I think you have subgenres of horror, and people might use the word thriller, but there's overlapping, or maybe even it is a subcategory of horror. I'm not a scholar in that area, but here's what I'll say. I would call any thriller or any traditional horror film a horror film. If and that's what it is. And it may have some elements of traditional ones, like the sounds and somebody's coming after you where you think they are, or it might have other things that are more psychological. And it might have both, because I think this had both, right?
Yeah, so you have that, and then you have once Beloved comes back and she's in the physical form, it's no longer the same way, but even though so-called creepy things are happening, right? It's kind of like, hey, this is like a grown person who doesn't understand, who needs the learning of someone who's recently out of the womb, basically, right? And we get that in other films where the people are walking all weird and stuff like that, right? But we don't, it's just like, for there to be a ghost is the unseen, right? But this could be the herd, and you just see the interactions it have with the physical world. But once the thing is there, or the being is there, then it kind of steps out of that realm, right? But if you could, if it looks like an actual person is here with us, do we see it as a ghost or as, this sort of horror, right? Maybe if, you kind of translucent and I could see through you, then, whoa, that's a ghost there, right? So then I categorize it as something different. But I think that's kind of what happened, where, it starts off one way and then it ends another way. And then you kind of become accepting of this ghost, kind of like they did with the, kind of like the mother did, because, you're taking us on a ride in this film. And I think that's part of it. Right? Because what happened, it's a ghost, but when, her and Paul D do whatever, right? You start taking sides of who did what wrong and stuff like that, right?
Okay, so like, let's not allude to it. Let's just talk more about what happens with Beloved, the ghost, when she's in the flesh, right? So, she comes and like Beloved there is kind of a weird comical moment, because every time I think about, Thandie Newton in the movie standing there, like talking about telling Paul D to make me feel good on the inside, like, or something about, touch me on the inside. That was it. I'm sorry, I done got her confused.
Inside part.
Or touch me on the inside part, something to that effect. Bottom line is she's seducing Paul D,
right,
who is her mother's man at this point. Although that, even in and of itself, for a discussion for another day, is that her mom has gotten with the man who was on the plantation with her, who was not her husband, and she still don't know whatever happened to her husband, and she's been waiting these years for her husband to come back. But anyway, back to Beloved. So Beloved seduces this man, and he seems like he can't resist it. It's almost like Beloved is like evil or the devil, because it's kind of played in that way, but then not completely. And then it's weird because you've got Setha loving her ghost daughter.
Yeah,
it just is, the whole thing is very weird.
But as a viewer, you're taking sides in it too, right? Because this is no longer like necessarily a ghost to you. This is somebody, look, we go more into depth into it, somebody you view as being able to make these decisions and all these other things, right? Even because they look like a grown person or a grown woman or even a an older adolescent, right? Who has the capacity to think and stuff, or should be, because we are just judging because of the act, right? And we get that a lot now. Oh, so this kid should be tried as an adult, right? Just because of the act, right? It needs to be categorized differently. And I think that's what's kind of happening with the audience in this movie, which could have you, I guess, kind of being able to empathize with Setha.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's tough. It's a hard position because, like, the way that I took the movie, I never, like, from the point that I realized it was Beloved, I'm like, oh, okay, it's just a child in an adult body. So I never looked at Beloved as if Beloved was like, I just thought it was like weird and creepy. And now, oh my goodness, toward the end, she's got, you know, a big belly because she had been impregnated by her mama's boyfriend who she seduced. And then, you know, you got the church ladies coming to, you know, sing the demon out of things, and she comes on the porch butt naked.
But see,
I mean, full on frontal. And
you
it is
can't always see. But that's what I'm saying. You can't just totally take it as, oh, you see it as a child, because you even use the word seduced, right? Which we wouldn't talk about as a kid.
That's a
doing.
that's a good point. But
You know,
but what I'm saying is her mental age, right?
Yeah,
and it wouldn't be unlike a person who might have some type of, you know, other ableness that affected their mental, and, you know, they grow up in their adult bodies and they are at chronologically that age, but they have the mind of a person who's much younger. That would be how I looked at it. And so, yeah, be maybe seduced. I don't know.
Right. But see, that's what I'm saying. Like, when you get all those factors together, it's basically things aren't just black and white, right? And even if they are, it's hard to just act and think in that way because of all our biases and everything that we bring into it, right? When you just see this grown woman on here, because she's a grown actress too, right? You see all this, and there are probably subconscious moments that you're thinking of them as an adult, right? And that's just how it goes. Like, when you, even with Setha and stuff, or people considering what she's been through, what Paul D's been through, what every black person in this film, right, is going through.
Well, now
and what's
we get
affecting
into the
them.
meat of what the point is of this book, right? Which is why the movie couldn't give us this. Like, the movie will give you flashes of what happened to Paul D. Like, there's like quick flashes or these montages of like where Seth is laying there asleep or Paul D is asleep and they're dreaming about what happened to them in the past. But we as an audience don't understand what is happening. It hasn't been explained to us. So even when we see like Paul D with this contraption around his neck, we don't understand what's going on in the film. Versus in the movie, they explained exactly what happened. And I mean, to get into, just let me just give you some examples. If you've seen this movie and you haven't read the book and you don't know what's going on, so they continue on to say in part of the book, you know, like the part that I read, these are the people who were on the plantation, Paul D, Paul F, so on and so forth, right? And they were all in their 20s, minus women. They were, and the book actually says this, they were effing cows, dreaming of the R word, thrashing on pallets, rubbing their thighs, and waiting for the new girl, the one who took baby Suggs' place after Hallie bought her with 5 years of Sundays. The new girl was Setha. Okay, so all of these men who were on the plantation, there were no women except baby Suggs, who's the mother of these 8 children, you know, who had 8 children of her own at some point. But so they only had one woman. And you got all of these men here who had not been allowed to just have their normal activities, that because they didn't have that, they were doing it with the cows. Okay. And I mean, this is what's going on in the book. Like, and it might be too much for some of y'all. It was too much for me. When you read it, it's outrageous. You know, the book is outrageous.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm saying about what was intentional, right, to put. Because some things you could say, hey, I read some narratives and these were in the narratives. And then there's other things where this is my imagination.
So Setha in the book went to Sweet Home when she was 13 years old, is when she was sold to the people at Sweet Home. So she shows up there at 13. These men, Paul D, who wanted her, Paul D's brothers all wanted her, and so did Hallie, the one she eventually chose as her husband. They all were like, you know, we want you back, girl, but we're going to let you choose which one of us you want to be your husband and to have a family with eventually. And so it was a kindness that they weren't acting out on her according to the way what was in the book. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because that was the barbaric circumstances that they had put the people in. Now, to your point about that, you know, what parts are in your mind as far as the movie is concerned, you know, what parts are in your mind? I think a lot about that.
What do you mean what parts are in the mind?
Like, you know, what part could be in your head versus like in Zetha's head?
Like,
where does she, you know? And to me, like, the question is always, was Beloved's ghost real? You know, because there's this idea, and I don't want to always question is something real, or as far as a horror and thinking of it as a supernatural horror, this ghost was the manifestation of just all the pain and the hurt and whatever, because there's a point in both the book and the movie when Paul D first arrives at the house and he see the house is going crazy and he's like, you know, how you up in this house? Because it looks normal from the outside, and he walk in, it's like red light and everything around, and it's looking like, you know, all kind of stuff going on. And at one point they acknowledge that they have a ghost that's in the house, and either Setha or Denver says, but it's not evil, it's just sad.
Yeah.
And that always stuck with me.
Yeah, but the town folks were, it looks like they observed, right?
When you say observe what? The ghost?
Beloved.
Oh, yeah. When she came out at the end,
that's
she
what
saw
I'm saying.
it.
So,
but, you know, I mean, who's telling the story? You know, we go back to all of that. Who is the narrator? Who's telling the story? How are we seeing this? But let me just suspend my reality and say that everything we see on the screen is real. That Beloved came to life and all of that. Okay, I can accept that. But why she came and when she came and all of these other things are important.
Why did the body continue to grow?
Why did she like, and then like it seemed that when she got pregnant, boom, she got pregnant, and then her belly was 8 months, 9 months in a day, you know? And it was very strange. And then the other part that doesn't really fully get explored, like that gets explored in the movie, which I did like, and I would like to take a closer look at, is this idea of Baby Suggs is kind of almost like a Sojourner Truth character, where or type of woman, where she's older with the wisdom and experience of having been enslaved herself and how she survived it, and giving the I don't want to just use something as trite as positive vibes, but essentially that and saying like the important part of us as our spirits in terms of what we've been able to endure and how, and that's the type of spirit. I'm not like the spirit, breath of life spirit, but like the spirit that's inside of you that lets you continue on through the most crazy of circumstances and adversity that was faced by Black folks at that point.
So which part makes you, right, too, because you have the spirit part where you don't see Beloved and it's just, I don't know, interacting with our world somehow, right?
Yeah.
But then once do you presume that the spirit is now in that body when we get Thandie Newton, right?
Yeah.
And then if it is, then this is the manifestation would be the axe, which is getting with Paul D and whatever else, right? And a chronological age of the spirit, right?
Well,
so
and also, okay,
the spirit,
so let's ask the question.
The body aged, but the spirit did not?
Exactly.
Instead of the other way?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like the idea of being forever young, right? You know, like people who die at a young age, then that's how old they get. They don't get, you know, when you see them later, they ain't 100. They still 27. I only say 27 because, you know, that that's magic number with the, you know, with all of the famous people who die at 27. But yeah, you know, so it's all of this. There's just so much to digest, and I try to keep the idea of the discussions and the questions in this first video that we're doing kind of on a more surface level, like, hey, let's just tell you this is the story we're supposed to be looking at, and and go to the comment with any questions that you have too, but because maybe we can address those in future videos. Right now I think we're only gonna promise 2 videos out of this, because it'll be this video and then the video asking the question about, you know, what does it mean to have done such a thing? And then if you guys want full breakdowns and stuff, then like we got to see that this video actually people watch it and care enough. And if you don't, it's cool. But I would recommend that people, this is just a piece of a Black American literature. Like you just need to have experienced it. Not necessarily through the movie. I would suggest reading or listening to the book, and
which is easier. Okay.
I don't know. I would just say I recommend that everyone listen to the novel or read the novel. And there's a lot to be analyzed, and people can talk and do all this theorizing. But at the end of the day, if you just listen to the novel, you're going to get the story, and the story will be heartbreaking and heinous and sad and all those other things. But you'll get the story. You might not like what you get, but you're going to get the story. Now, maybe the discussions help you feel better about the story or unpack your feelings about this experience. And it's the unpacking of that, I think. And it hits everybody differently, for different reasons. We'll go more into that in the second video on this book. But the reason I think it hits people differently is because we have different.
Wait, the second video on this book?
On this movie. The second video on this movie. It's almost like inseparable at this point, because the movie, in my opinion, is deficient enough that you kind of need both. But the scenes that we do see in the movie, like one of the scenes with Baby Suggs, and like when the scene when they finally show you what Setha did to her children, like those scenes are pretty close to the book. So you can break those scenes down in the movie. It's just you don't get a lot of the other background stuff. But I don't know. How do you feel about it? Do you? Because you don't really seem. You thought it was good. I don't know. You just don't seem emotionally impacted so much. And maybe it's just because I wear mine on the sleeve a little bit more.
I guess, but that's what determines whether something is good or not, too. Well, it's a factor, right? So if I don't feel anything, then it's probably not good. But if I do, then it may make it even better, right? So, but from what I've seen and what happens, it's weird. And I don't really like weird because there's just a lot of weird things that's just happening. And I don't know if you could have made it where, okay, once there's this manifestation, then you don't need all the weird, extra weird things happening. Right? Because I think we're taking it out of, I'm taking it out of that metaphysical realm and putting it into the physical world. But I think they just had all kind of stuff just always happening. That just shouldn't have been happening. But yeah, I think it was good if you just watch it 3 times or whatever, and then you're like, okay, that's what happened.
Toni Morrison, the person who wrote it, had to watch it 3 times. So should you?
Yeah. So like, and what it's like with music, you can listen to a song for 20 years and don't even know what it's about. Like just recently, Fast Cars, people just figured out what the song was about.
Tracy Chapman.
Yeah, Tracy Chapman, right? So does that make it any less of a brilliant song? You know what I'm saying? Like maybe you just have to listen
like I
quite
feel
a few times.
Like what this story makes me feel like it's very odd, but 2 things. One, I was already, and I know a lot of y'all are too, familiar with Toni Morrison's writings. I think about Sula and The Bluest Eye and all the books that I read as a kid that she wrote. That's number one. So you go into it knowing that Toni Morrison is not the kind of, like, I wanted to do this review well. Like, I can take this review and discussion about this film and book and take it in a way that I might take.
But was she like Zora Neale Hurston?
Yes. She was like, she's Zora Neale Hurston level.
Yeah,
and this
but
is
I'm
why,
talking about the content.
Some similarities could be drawn.
Okay.
They seem to write about similar time periods. As Zora Neale Hurston was writing more about early 19th.
And the supernatural type of.
No.
All right. So, but this seems to be more like that.
But this is one book. Like,
well, right. That's what I'm saying. So if I'm comparing 2 writers, so let's say we have I don't know, Tyler Perry, who is now going to do some historical type of film, like, would you just be like, yeah, it's similar because he done this one movie like this, right? This isn't the type of film or book that you do, right? It seems more like this other writer.
So what I would say is that there are similarities. Like when I think of a movie of this style, yeah, this one went off the rails a little bit because of the supernatural aspect of it. But it is not unlike Alice Walker and The Color Purple or Their Eyes Were Watching God with Zora Neale Hurston, in that the feel, because guess what? These all have female leads, and they're talking about the perspective of the woman in this time period in history, and they are Black women, and they're telling the stories of Black women, and there is a synergy, I feel like, that happens. Plus, they were aware of one another. They were in different generations.
I think she was
I mean, Zora
older.
Neale Hurston was first, but like Alice Walker and Toni Morrison kind of coming around that same time period, and there are other, of course, authors as well. But when I think of them, so they're in the same vein, although they told stories somewhat differently. When I think of the characters, I feel Setha could have been Celi's sister, even though they were from slightly different time periods. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
well,
that's what I'm saying. So when you ask me if they're similar,
I
this is
kinda
where
think
my
of-
answer comes from.
yeah, I
Not
think of
about
kinda
this
like
one book.
basically genre, right? So that's what I think of when I categorize. I may be like, oh, John Singleton, he does, hood movies about blah blah blah, right? Living hood violence, gangster type movies, right? And then I think of Spike Lee, he do hood movies that's more of like based on just character type stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Do you consider them in the same genre?
No, they just happen to make Black movies. Well, at one point, they were making Black movies. I think of them differently. Or even like a Jordan Peele, right? I wouldn't put him in the same sort of when I'm comparing just these types of writers, I would say, even though they're directors. But yeah, I would just look at them differently. So that's what I do when we doing all these different types of movies. That's kind of how I'm thinking of them. And maybe people are using different terms than I am actually thinking about.
So, like, I just feel this way. I understand why Oprah wanted to bring this to the big screen. I understand why this was one of Oprah's favorite books. I identify with the characters in this book. Not that I would, do all that, but I identify with the burden of the women. And this is why, as a Black woman. Now, obviously, I didn't, I wasn't raised on a plantation and everything, but I guess you could say normalized for the time period in which I live, I understand what it means to be a Black woman, as these women were understanding what that means. And not just simply to be a Black woman, but in this case, we do get Paul D's story to be a Black man, or to be Black, period, in this country with everything that was going on. And on one hand, that is a heavy burden. That is a heavy thing to consider and think about. And then on the other hand, it is a joy to feel like there was somebody who wrote something who saw you and your position in things. So we could take a movie that's maybe more modern, or a book that's more modern, and say, I see myself in there, as opposed to somebody never seeing yourself or any aspect of it in a story. Because I'm sure there's ways where you identify with Paul D. Like Paul D was just treated like a Black man of that time. And I'm sure you've been treated like a Black man of this time. And that ain't always been fair.
Yeah, I guess.
Or we could just choose to not, choose to look at the movie for, it's a supernatural thing, and the dog's eye pops out, and, a pregnant ghost is on the porch, and then she gets exorcised. It's all in, how the person takes the movie. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess you can. right? But yeah, I see it different ways, all kind of ways.
There wasn't a whole lot of analysis in this video because of, again, we covered it at a high level. Um, I think I think there's at least one video that we should do on this just to ask the general question and focus more in on that about, someone who would do something like this and how society would view them, how we would view them personally. Could we understand her position? All of those questions. And then after that, I don't know that we do more on this film. Y'all will let us know whether we do more on this film, because I could easily do 20 videos on this film and not be finished, or film/book, film/novel, but it's all in what people want to hear.
If you made it this far, type 124 in the comments so we'll know you're one of the real ones who stick around to the end.
Be sure to check out one of the videos that's on the screen right now.